I am Tiana, 33 years old, and my entire future shattered on the scorching concrete of a hospital parking lot. The words from the doctor were still echoing in my ears, ringing like a death knell. Severe ovarian cysts, irreversible complications, complete infertility. I had barely processed the devastating misdiagnosis before my fiancé Marcus dragged me out of the waiting room. He did not offer a comforting hug, nor did he whisper that we would find another way. Instead, he marched me straight to his luxury sports car, his jaw clenched, his eyes completely devoid of the love I thought existed. "I cannot do this, Tiana," Marcus said, keeping his voice dangerously low so the passing nurses would not hear. He was always obsessed with maintaining his perfect elite image. "You know exactly what my family expects. I need a woman who can build my legacy, a woman who can actually give me heirs. This is a dead end." He pulled my apartment keys out from his pocket and dropped them carelessly onto the hood of the car. The metal scraped against the pristine paint, a harsh, grating sound that perfectly mirrored the sudden absolute tearing of my own heart. I stood there paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of his words. "A dead end," I whispered, my voice trembling as tears threatened to spill over my eyelashes. "Marcus, we have been together for 3 years. We built a life. We are supposed to get married in 4 months. You are leaving me because of a medical condition." Marcus sighed, adjusting his tailored suit jacket, as if my grief was merely a minor inconvenience in his busy schedule. "Do not be dramatic, Tiana. You are a very smart businesswoman. You should understand that a bad investment needs to be cut." Before I could even respond to that monstrous statement, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels echoed across the pavement. Beatrice Marcus's mother emerged from the passenger side of his car. She had insisted on driving him to the hospital today, claiming she wanted to be there for the good news regarding her future grandchildren. Instead, she had been eavesdropping, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She marched up to me, her expensive church hat blocking the sun, casting a dark, terrifying shadow over my face. Her cold eyes held nothing but pure, unadulterated contempt for my current vulnerability. "I always told you she was defective, Marcus," Beatrice sneered, not even bothering to look at my face. She stared directly down at my left hand. "A woman who cannot bear children is a useless woman. She has nothing to offer the bloodline of this family." She lunged forward with astonishing speed. Before I could pull my hand away, her sharp manicured fingernails dug into my skin. With a violent yank, she ripped the 2-carat diamond engagement ring off my trembling finger. The sudden friction burned my skin, leaving a bright red mark where his empty promise had lived. "What are you doing?" I gasped, clutching my bruised hand against my chest. "That ring was a symbol of our commitment." Beatrice let out a cold, mocking laugh, dropping the diamond into her crocodile leather handbag. "Commitment. Oh, please, this ring belongs on the finger of a woman who can secure our legacy in Atlanta's high society. Not some barren girl who spends all her time running a mediocre public relations agency. You are a failure to your own biology, Tiana. My son is destined for greatness, and he certainly will not be dragged down by a broken, empty vessel." I looked at Marcus silently, begging him to defend me, to tell his mother she had crossed an unforgivable line. Instead, he simply opened the driver's door and slid right into the luxury leather seat. "Let us go, Mother," he said, not even glancing in my direction. "We have a dinner reservation at the country club, and I need to start calling the vendors to cancel the wedding deposits." Beatrice smiled triumphantly, stepping into the passenger side. She rolled down the tinted window just a fraction, offering me one last look of absolute disgust. "Go find a pity party, Tiana." The engine roared to life, a deafening sound that drowned out the frantic beating of my own broken heart. I watched the sleek black cars speed out of the hospital parking lot, leaving me completely alone on the blistering pavement. The exhaust fumes choked the humid summer air around me. They had discarded me like a piece of trash. No hesitation, no empathy, no backward glance. Just a brutal, calculated execution of a relationship I thought was my entire future. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever felt, wrapping around my throat like a suffocating vice. I did not collapse. I did not fall to my knees and scream into the empty sky. I slowly reached out and picked up my apartment keys from the hot hood of my car. My hand was still stinging from where Beatrice had clawed me, but the tears had completely stopped. A terrifying icy calm began to wash over my mind. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought I was just a useless, infertile woman who would quietly fade into the background of their elite, perfect lives. They thought I would mourn the loss of their prestigious presence forever. They were entirely wrong. I gripped the keys tightly in my palm, feeling the sharp metal bite into my skin, anchoring me to reality. I turned around and looked back at the towering glass facade of the hospital. Deep in my abdomen, a strange, persistent cramping fluttered, a sensation that the doctor had dismissed just moments ago. Little did I know the universe was already plotting the most spectacular revenge on my behalf. I was not broken, and I certainly was not empty. My journey to becoming their ultimate nightmare was just beginning, starting with a miraculous second opinion tomorrow. The morning sun offered no comfort as I woke up in my empty apartment. That promised appointment had been canceled, forcing me to endure an agonizing 7 days of waiting to see a top-tier specialist. I navigated a thick haze of physical pain and emotional devastation. The sharp, persistent cramping in my lower abdomen served as a cruel reminder of the future Marcus had stolen from me. I blocked his number and focused entirely on surviving the physical agony radiating through my body. When the day of my appointment finally arrived, I walked into the pristine waiting room of Dr. Eris Thorne. She was a no-nonsense professional who did not dismiss women's pain. I sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table, my hands trembling as I recounted the brutal verdict of severe ovarian cysts and complete infertility. Dr. Thorne listened patiently before instructing me to lie back for an ultrasound. I braced myself for confirmation of my worst fears, closing my eyes tightly. The silence in the examination room stretched out for what felt like hours. I expected her to nod sympathetically or offer empty platitudes about adoption. Instead, she let out a sharp gasp. The ultrasound wand stopped moving. I opened my eyes instantly, my heart hammering violently. Dr. Thorne was staring at the monitor, her brow furrowed in absolute concentration. She adjusted the screen and looked directly down at me. "Tiana," Dr. Thorne said, her voice remarkably gentle but laced with undeniable shock. "Whoever gave you that previous diagnosis should have their medical license revoked immediately. You do not have severe ovarian cysts. You are not infertile." I sat up so fast the paper beneath me tore loudly. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of sudden, terrifying hope. "The pain is constant. The other doctor was absolutely certain." Dr. Thorne turned the monitor so I could see the screen. "The pain you are experiencing is round ligament pain severely exacerbated by stress and dehydration," she explained. "Tiana, look right here. You are pregnant, and you are not just carrying one child." The room started to spin. "Pregnant?" I choked out, gripping the edges of the examination table to keep from collapsing. "But they told me I was barren. They told me I was a dead end." "They were completely wrong," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You are roughly 8 weeks along, and judging by the separate amniotic sacs present on this scan, I am looking at 3 distinct heartbeats. Tiana, you are pregnant with triplets." 3 distinct, miraculous heartbeats. The words crashed into my reality like a freight train. I stared at the monitor, watching the tiny rhythmic flickers of light pulsating on the dark screen. The air was sucked completely out of my lungs. I was actually going to be a beautiful mother. I was carrying 3 children. Marcus's children. A profound realization slammed into my chest. Marcus, the man who demanded an heir to his bougie Atlanta throne, had literally abandoned his entire bloodline in a hospital parking lot. He had tossed my apartment keys at me and walked away from his own flesh and blood without a second thought. Beatrice had ripped a diamond off the finger of the woman carrying her only grandchildren. They had discarded me for being an empty vessel, but I was carrying the very legacy they claimed to worship above all else. Tears of pure, overwhelming shock streamed down my face, but they were no longer tears of grief. They were tears of absolute triumph. The cosmic irony of the situation was almost too incredible to comprehend. Marcus had thrown away a kingdom because he lacked the patience to wait for the truth. Are they healthy? I asked, swiping the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. Please tell me they are safe. They are perfectly healthy. Dr. Thorne smiled reassuringly. We will need to monitor you closely because a multiple pregnancy is automatically considered high risk, but the heartbeats are exceptionally strong. You are going to have a very full house, Tiana. I left the clinic clutching glossy ultrasound photos like winning lottery tickets. The blistering Atlanta heat no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a warm, welcoming embrace. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and stared at the three tiny smudges on the printout. Aria, Brielle, and Camille. The names instantly materialized in my mind, a fierce maternal instinct roaring to life. They belonged entirely to me, and I would never let Marcus or his toxic mother anywhere near them. I pulled out my phone and looked at the blocked contact list. Marcus was finally gone. He had made his choice. He had chosen his superficial country club status and his mother's cruel approval over the woman who loved him. Now he would never get to experience the unimaginable wealth I carried. I started the engine, the hum of the motor matching the newfound rhythm of my determination. I was not going to cry anymore. I was going to build a fortress for my daughters. I would use my sharp business acumen and every ounce of spite running through my veins to create an empire so massive it would block out the sun. When I arrived back at my apartment, I walked straight to the bathroom mirror. I looked at the woman staring back at me. She was no longer a discarded fiancé. She was a mother, a protector, and a fierce warrior. The pain of the betrayal was still there, but it had magically transformed into highly combustible fuel. Every tear I had shed was now a heavy brick in the foundation of my future. We are going to be untouchable, I whispered to my reflection, placing a protective hand over my flat stomach. They desperately wanted a legacy, but we are going to build a dynasty they will never get to claim as their own. The very next morning, I woke up with a singular, ferocious focus. The paralyzing grief that had suffocated me for a week was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating drive. I did not text Marcus. I did not call his haughty mother to gloat about the triplets. Let them stew in their blind arrogance. I immediately tapped into the formidable network I had cultivated during my undergraduate years. My proud HBCU sisters from Spelman College were fiercely loyal, consistently holding high-ranking executive positions across Atlanta's highly competitive corporate landscape. I reached out directly to my former roommate, a brilliant and ruthless corporate lawyer, and we successfully drafted the official founding documents for Vanguard Holdings by the very end of that same week. My vision was incredibly clear. I would merge elite public relations with luxury real estate acquisitions. I knew all of Marcus's wealthy image-obsessed associates. I knew their dirty secrets, their hidden debts, and their desperate need for spotless public reputations. I would sell them absolute discretion while quietly buying up their distressed assets. Launching a dual-focused firm while managing a high-risk pregnancy was a monumental task. My exhausting days started sharply at 4 in the morning. I would swallow my prenatal vitamins, fight through the crushing waves of morning sickness, and sit at my dining table with my laptop. I completely transformed my small, modest apartment into a fully functional high-tech command center. I ruthlessly targeted disgraced politicians, failing generational wealth families, and desperate executives who needed their scandals scrubbed from the internet. I offered them airtight non-disclosure agreements and flawless crisis management. In exchange, I demanded exorbitant retainer fees and first rights of refusal on their depreciating luxury properties. By my second trimester, the physical toll of carrying 3 growing babies became undeniably intense. My ankles swelled, my back ached constantly, and Dr. Thorne ordered me to strict bed rest. I simply moved my command center to my mattress. Propped up by a mountain of pillows, I took video calls with powerful corporate leaders. I wore a tailored blazer on top and comfortable sweatpants entirely out of frame. When the severe cramps threatened to start my labor prematurely, I inhaled deeply, breathed through the agonizing pain, smoothly muted my laptop microphone, and successfully closed multiple multi-million-dollar commercial acquisition deals without blinking an eye. I was a woman possessed by pure ambition. Every single dollar I made went directly into a secure trust fund for Aria, Brielle, and Camille. The real estate division of Vanguard Holdings grew at an unprecedented rate. I specialized in purchasing heavily leveraged mansions in Buckhead and exclusive country club estates that arrogant families could no longer afford. They were so desperate to maintain their bougie facades. They willingly and desperately sold their sprawling ancestral properties to my anonymous holding company for literal pennies on the dollar, just to rent them right back and entirely avoid the devastating public embarrassment of a highly publicized bank foreclosure. I was literally buying up the ground beneath the Atlanta elite, and they had absolutely no idea that a pregnant, discarded woman was their new landlord. Throughout this relentless grind, I successfully avoided Marcus and Beatrice. I heard through the grapevine that Marcus had quickly moved on to a new target. He was actively courting a wealthy white woman from a supposedly prominent family, desperate to secure the social elevation his mother deeply craved. I scoffed loudly at the pathetic news. I permanently muted the annoying mutual friends who constantly tried to share the useless daily gossip. I did not have the luxury of distraction. My daughters were growing stronger every single day, and my empire was expanding right alongside them. I was silently orchestrating a massive transfer of wealth and power while they were busy planning superficial country club mixers. The climax of my silent grind arrived in the dead of winter. At 34 weeks, my water broke during a tense negotiations call with a major logistics firm. I calmly finalized the contract, emailed the signed documents to my lawyer, and carefully drove myself to the hospital. The difficult delivery was a loud, chaotic blur of bright surgical lights, sharp medical commands, and intensely draining physical exertion. I refused to let the fear of being a single mother break me. I forcefully pushed through the excruciating hours of labor with the exact same ruthless ferocity I enthusiastically applied to growing my newly established business empire. When the nurses finally placed my three beautiful, perfectly healthy daughters on my chest, the entire world stopped spinning. Aria, Brielle, and Camille let out their first loud, demanding cries. They were exact replicas of their father, but they possessed my unbreakable spirit. I looked down at their tiny, perfect faces and made a silent vow. They would never experience the sting of rejection. They would never be treated as empty vessels or disposable assets. They were the true, absolute rulers of the massive financial empire I had meticulously and painstakingly built completely from the cold ashes of my own shattered, broken heart. Returning home with three infants was a monumental challenge, but I tackled it with extreme precision. I hired a trusted team of nannies, allowing me to maintain my relentless business momentum. I stubbornly refused to sleep. I adamantly refused to slow down. I was closing huge business deals while patiently bottle feeding my girls at 2 in the morning. My crisis management firm became the most sought-after agency in the city. Corporations were practically begging for my representation, completely unaware of the exhausted but victorious mother running the entire show directly behind the scenes. My bank accounts swelled, my property portfolio multiplied incredibly fast, and my unique influence within the city finally solidified into something deeply permanent and unshakable. I had taken the brutal rejection Marcus inflicted upon me and weaponized it into an unstoppable force of nature. I became a true living legend. The reality of building an empire with three newborns was a chaotic symphony of sleepless nights and high-stakes negotiations. Aria, Brielle, and Camille were beautiful, demanding forces of nature. They shared their father's striking features, but their fierce, unrelenting energy was entirely mine. My sprawling new penthouse in Midtown Atlanta became my ultimate sanctuary and my absolute fortress. The living room was completely divided between baby swings, mountains of diapers, and pristine whiteboards covered in highly classified corporate acquisition strategies. I hired a team of elite discreet nannies who operated with military precision, allowing me to fully immerse myself. My firm, Vanguard Holdings, exploded onto the Atlanta scene like a silent, unstoppable hurricane. I ruthlessly capitalized on the devastating scandals of the wealthy elite. When a prominent real estate mogul was caught embezzling millions, my public relations team swooped in to manage the media fallout. In exchange for keeping him completely out of federal prison, I forced him to surrender his most valuable commercial properties to my anonymous holding company at a staggering 90% discount. I was not just managing their crises anymore. I was systematically stripping them of their prized assets and adding them to my portfolio. Every single morning, I would sit at my massive glass desk nursing one of my daughters while finalizing incredibly lucrative contracts. My Spellman sisters were instrumental in my rapid ascent. They funneled high-profile clients directly to my firm, ensuring that Vanguard Holdings became the absolute gold standard for corporate damage control. The wealthy, arrogant families of Atlanta desperately needed my services, completely unaware that their ultimate savior was the very same woman they would normally look down upon. I wielded my hidden power with surgical precision, extracting maximum value from every single desperate billionaire who walked into my boardroom. As the months passed, my financial portfolio grew into a massive multi-million-dollar empire. I purchased luxury apartment complexes in Buckhead, exclusive commercial high-rises downtown, and sprawling estates in the wealthiest suburbs. I purposefully targeted properties owned by the incredibly pretentious social circles that Marcus and his toxic mother worshipped. It brought me an immense, wicked satisfaction to know that the very people Beatrice desperately tried to impress were now quietly paying me exorbitant rent just to maintain their fake glamorous lifestyles. They were effectively funding the generational wealth of the exact grandchildren they had viciously thrown completely away. I completely shielded my daughters from the public eye. My private life was heavily guarded, protected by ironclad non-disclosure agreements and ruthless security teams. I wanted Aria, Brielle, and Camille to grow up surrounded by pure love, unconditional support, and unimaginable wealth, completely free from the toxic, manipulative grasp of their biological father. Whenever I looked at their innocent, smiling faces, my determination only intensified. I was not just building a highly successful corporate holding company. I was securing a legendary generational dynasty that no arrogant man could ever tear down or claim as his hard-earned business achievement. Meanwhile, the local gossip blogs and high society whispers occasionally mentioned Marcus. He had officially started dating Eleanor Kensington, a white woman from a supposedly prestigious old money family. Beatrice was absolutely thrilled, constantly boasting to anyone who would listen about her son and his brilliant new match. They paraded around Atlanta's most exclusive country clubs, completely oblivious to the fact that I now owned the parent company that managed half of those establishments. Their desperate need for social validation was almost comical compared to the absolute concrete financial power I wielded effortlessly from the quiet comfort of my shadows. I poured every ounce of my energy into ensuring Vanguard Holdings remained absolutely flawless. We handled massive corporate mergers, navigated devastating public relations nightmares for major tech firms, and quietly acquired failing businesses before they even hit the public market. My reputation as a ruthless, brilliant fixer became legendary within closed corporate boardrooms. CEOs of billion-dollar companies had my direct private phone number on speed dial. Yet, I rarely attended their lavish, superficial galas. I preferred to remain an intimidating, faceless entity, letting my phenomenal results speak entirely for themselves while my former fiancé chased empty, fleeting high status. As my daughters approached their second birthday, they were thriving beautifully. They were walking, babbling incessantly, and filling my penthouse with genuine, unfiltered joy. They had the absolute best pediatricians, the most elite private tutors, and a mother who loved them with a fierce, terrifying intensity. They lacked absolutely nothing. The deep, agonizing wound of Marcus and his brutal parking lot abandonment had fully healed into a thick, impenetrable armor. I had successfully transformed his devastating rejection into the ultimate catalyst for my phenomenal success. I was richer, stronger, and infinitely happier than I had ever been in my life. I stood on the expansive balcony of my penthouse, watching the glittering Atlanta skyline stretch out endlessly before me. The city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds in the warm night air. I held a glass of sparkling cider, savoring the absolute peace of my carefully constructed world. Inside, my three beautiful daughters were sleeping soundly in their custom velvet-lined cribs. I had completely won the game they thought they had kicked me out of. I was the silent queen of a city they merely rented space in. Everything was perfectly aligned, perfectly managed, and completely under my absolute control. But the universe always has a funny way of bringing the past right back to your front door. The absolute peak of my silent, monumental victory was suddenly interrupted by a thick cream-colored envelope that arrived via specialized courier the very next morning. I recognized the pretentious embossed gold lettering immediately. It was the signature stationery used by the most elite, obnoxious wedding planners in the entire state of Georgia. I had not spoken to Marcus or Beatrice in 2 entire years. They thought I was still that broken, barren woman weeping on the hot concrete. They were wrong. The heavy cream-colored envelope felt substantial in my hands, practically dripping with the desperate need for social validation. I slid my manicured thumbnail under the gold wax seal, breaking the pretentious crest that Marcus and his mother had clearly chosen to simulate a history they did not actually possess. Inside rested a painfully extravagant wedding invitation. The thick cardstock was edged in gold leaf, featuring elaborate calligraphy that announced the upcoming union of Marcus and Eleanor Kensington. The Kensington name was widely recognized in Atlanta as supposed old money, a family that prided itself on generational wealth and exclusive country club memberships. My eyes scanned the pretentious wording, but it was the handwritten note carefully tucked behind the main invitation that truly caught my attention. The familiar, sharp cursive handwriting belonged unmistakably to Beatrice. I unfolded the small piece of matching stationery and read the venomous words she had taken the time to write. Tiana Marcus is finally marrying a real woman who can provide the legacy our family deserves. I included you on the guest list so you could see what a proper elite union looks like. Perhaps witnessing true happiness will help you move on from your empty, barren life. Do not bother bringing a gift. Your presence will be amusing enough for us. A cold, sharp laugh escaped my lips, echoing through the expansive silence of my luxury penthouse. 2 entire years had passed, and Beatrice was still exactly the same bitter, deeply insecure woman she had always been. She had deliberately tracked down my old forwarding address, completely unaware that the mail was being automatically routed to Vanguard Holdings' secure corporate mailroom. She actually thought she was delivering a crushing blow to a defeated, discarded woman. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to publicly rub my nose in my alleged infertility while celebrating her son's supposed elevation into white high society. I set the invitation down on my massive glass desk and walked softly into the adjacent nursery. Aria, Brielle, and Camille were sound asleep in their custom cribs. Their soft, rhythmic breathing filled the dimly lit room with an indescribable peace. I gently stroked Brielle's soft cheek, feeling a fierce, terrifying wave of protective maternal love wash over me. Marcus had thrown away these 3 beautiful, perfect daughters because he lacked the patience and character to weather a single storm. Now he was marrying a woman for her perceived status, while his mother gleefully tried to weaponize my past trauma. They wanted a show. They wanted a pathetic, weeping ex-fiancé to point at and mock during their lavish reception. I walked back into my office and picked up the invitation again. The wedding was scheduled to take place in exactly 4 weeks at the Magnolia Estates Country Club. It was a notoriously exclusive venue in Atlanta, known for its strict membership requirements and exorbitant event fees. I stared at the elegant font, my mind operating with the cold, ruthless efficiency that had built my multi-million-dollar empire. I could simply throw the invitation into the shredder. I could continue living my incredibly successful, fiercely private life, completely ignoring the toxic people who had abandoned me in a hospital parking lot. That would certainly be the easiest, most peaceful option. However, peace was no longer my primary objective. Beatrice had intentionally invited the devil to dinner, and I was going to answer the call. I sat down at my computer, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. If Marcus was marrying into the Kensington family, I needed to know absolutely everything about them. My crisis management firm specialized in uncovering the deeply buried, heavily guarded secrets of the Atlanta elite. I had an entire team of brilliant, relentless investigators who could find the dirt on anyone. I opened a secure encrypted messaging channel and contacted my lead intelligence officer, a brilliant Spellman sister named Maya, who possessed an unmatched talent for forensic accounting and corporate espionage. Maya, I typed quickly, my eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. I need a comprehensive top-to-bottom background check on the Kensington family, specifically Eleanor Kensington and her immediate relatives. I want their banking records, their hidden corporate liabilities, their tax histories, and every single unlisted debt they currently hold. Leave absolutely no stone unturned. I want to know what they eat for breakfast and how they pay for it. Dig into every single corporate filing connected to their name. Find out if their old money reputation is actually real or just a carefully maintained public facade. Maya's response appeared on my screen within 30 seconds. Consider it done, boss. What is the occasion? Are we targeting a new hostile acquisition for Vanguard Holdings? Something like that. I typed back, a cold smile forming on my lips. We are preparing for a wedding. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, tapping the gold foil invitation against my desk. Marcus and Beatrice were completely blinded by their desperate, pathetic obsession with high society status. They were so eager to climb the social ladder that they probably had not bothered to look closely at the rungs they were stepping on. The Kensington family portrayed an image of flawless, untouchable wealth, but in my line of work, I knew that glittering facades usually hid the darkest financial decay. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and watched the sun rise over the Atlanta skyline. This was my city, my territory. Beatrice wanted to humiliate the barren ex-fiancé. She wanted to parade her son's new supposedly superior bride in front of me to prove that I was nothing more than a discarded, worthless mistake. She had absolutely no idea that she had just formally invited her own destruction. I was not just going to attend this wedding. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire reality. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter taste. Let the absolute destruction and the games finally begin. Maya works fast. By Tuesday morning, a highly encrypted file landed in my private inbox. The subject line read simply, Kensington Financials. I locked the frosted glass doors of my executive suite, poured a fresh espresso, and opened the document. The Kensington family had spent decades cultivating an image of untouchable white Southern aristocracy. They hosted expensive charity galas, bred champion show horses, and looked down their perfectly sculpted noses at newly wealthy black professionals like Marcus. Beatrice practically worshipped them. She viewed this marriage as her ultimate ticket into the exclusive rooms she had always been barred from entering. But as I scrolled through Maya's meticulous forensic accounting, that flawless facade immediately shattered into a million pathetic pieces. They were completely and utterly broke. Eleanor Kensington was not an heiress. She was a heavy anchor attached to a rapidly sinking ship. Her older brother Preston had taken over the family logistics firm 5 years ago after their father unexpectedly passed away. Preston possessed all the arrogance of old money, with absolutely none of the required business acumen. He spent his days playing golf and treating his employees like disposable servants, completely ignoring the fact that his company's revenue had been steadily declining for an entire decade. He had made a series of catastrophic, highly leveraged investments, mortgaged their ancestral estate to the absolute breaking point, and completely drained their offshore trust funds. Just 2 weeks prior, Preston had quietly filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for their primary holding company. They were drowning in over $3 million of toxic debt, and the bank was actively preparing to foreclose on the sprawling Kensington mansion, located right in the heart of Buckhead. I leaned closer to the glowing monitor, my eyes narrowing as I expertly connected the intricate financial dots. It all made perfect sense now. Preston was desperately scrambling for a bailout, and he had found the ultimate willing mark in Marcus. Marcus was a highly paid corporate attorney, pulling in a massive salary, completely blinded by his desperate desire to break into Atlanta's elite white high society. Preston had undoubtedly orchestrated this entire romance from the very beginning. He served up his sister Eleanor on a silver platter, knowing Marcus would eagerly drain his own bank accounts to fund the extravagant Kensington lifestyle and quietly pay off their secret debts. They were using my ex-fiancé as a glorified walking automated teller machine, and Marcus was too busy chasing social validation to even bother checking their credit scores. The profound irony of the situation made me laugh out loud in the empty office. Marcus had brutally discarded me in a hospital parking lot because he claimed I was a bad investment. He told me he needed a woman who could secure his prestigious legacy. Now he was blindly marrying into a family that was secretly bankrupt, a family that viewed his hard-earned black wealth strictly as a convenient financial lifeline. Preston clearly despised Marcus, tolerating him only because he needed the cash to save his own aristocratic skin. Beatrice probably thought she was winning the ultimate social lottery, completely unaware that she was marrying her precious, brilliant son into absolute financial ruin. I printed the heavy dossier, feeling the immense tangible power resting right in my hands. The pages were warm from the printer, filled with red ink and negative balances. The Kensingtons owed their staggering debt to a mid-level private equity firm that lacked the aggressive legal muscle to collect efficiently. Preston had been dodging their collection calls for months, hiding behind his prominent last name and country club connections. Eleanor was complicit in the entire scheme. She was playing the role of the blushing wealthy bride while secretly maxing out credit cards just to pay for her ridiculously expensive wedding dress. They were all absolute frauds, putting on a spectacular theatrical performance to trap a man who was equally obsessed with superficial appearances. I walked over to the expansive window, watching the morning traffic crawl along the busy Atlanta streets. I thought about the three beautiful daughters sleeping peacefully in my penthouse. They were the true heirs, the real legacy that Marcus had thrown away, like garbage. I had spent the last 2 years building a monumental empire for them, securing their futures with concrete assets and unshakable power. Meanwhile, their biological father was eagerly signing up to adopt $3 million of toxic white debt just to gain access to a country club dining room. The level of sheer delusion required to make such a disastrous choice was almost impressive. I walked back to my desk and picked up the printed financial report. I was not going to let Preston Kensington simply walk away from his massive failures. I was not going to let Eleanor play the superior wealthy bride while treating me like a bitter barren outcast. If they wanted to play ruthless games with money and status, they were about to face the undisputed queen of the board. Vanguard Holdings had a dedicated acquisitions department that specialized in buying up distressed debt portfolios. I reached for my desk phone, dialing the direct line for my chief financial officer. It was time to completely flip the script on this fake fairy tale wedding. "Listen carefully," I commanded when my financial officer answered. "I forwarded you a classified dossier on the Kensington family. They owe $3 million to Apex Capital. Purchase that debt portfolio immediately. Offer a 10% premium for a fast, quiet transfer. I want exclusive rights to the Kensington estate foreclosure by Friday afternoon. Do not take no for an answer." I slowly hung up the phone and smiled. I was truly about to become their absolute worst nightmare imaginable. They arrogantly assumed they could carelessly weaponize my painful past trauma to artificially elevate their fake social standing in Atlanta. They were completely undeniably dead wrong. I had built an impenetrable financial fortress, and they were in my crosshairs. The execution of a hostile financial takeover requires absolute precision and unwavering patience. I did not immediately march into a courtroom or send a flashy legal notice to the Kensington family. That would be entirely too merciful. Instead, I let my chief financial officer handle the aggressive negotiations with Apex Capital. By Wednesday morning, the mid-level private equity firm was practically begging to offload Preston Kensington's toxic $3 million debt portfolio. They had spent over a year chasing a broke aristocrat who consistently hid behind gated driveways and expensive legal threats. When Vanguard Holdings offered to purchase the entire debt package at a 10% premium, the managing partners at Apex Capital signed the transfer documents without asking a single question. They were utterly relieved to wipe the massive deficit from their quarterly reports. I was utterly thrilled to acquire the ultimate leverage over the people who thought they were entirely untouchable. The heavy sealed legal folders arrived at my penthouse via private courier on Thursday afternoon. I sat at my dining table, pushing aside a stack of colorful baby books and plush toys to make room for the stark reality of the Kensington family's profound failures. My three daughters, Aria, Brielle, and Camille, were playing happily on their custom playmat just a few feet away. Their joyful, innocent laughter filled the expansive room, creating a beautifully surreal contrast to the ruthless corporate destruction I was currently orchestrating. I opened the thick files and spread the crisp, freshly notarized documents across the glass surface. The paperwork was absolutely breathtaking in its brutal finality. I was now the sole undisputed owner of every single outstanding loan, every maxed out line of credit, and every defaulted corporate bond attached to Preston Kensington's failing logistics company. More importantly, I now held the exclusive right to execute the immediate foreclosure on the sprawling Kensington ancestral estate, located in the most expensive zip code in Atlanta. I picked up the primary deed of trust for their highly boasted mansion. For decades, the Kensington family had used this massive historical property as their ultimate status symbol. They hosted lavish, exclusive charity galas on those manicured lawns, deliberately turning away anyone who did not fit their archaic, restrictive definitions of high society. Beatrice had always spoken about that house with a sickening level of reverence, treating it like a sacred temple of white wealth that she desperately wanted her son to access. Marcus was likely dreaming about walking down that grand, sweeping staircase, completely convinced he was marrying into unbreakable generational security. He had no idea that the majestic roof over his future bride's head no longer belonged to her arrogant brother. It belonged entirely to the black woman he had brutally abandoned in a hospital parking lot 2 years ago. I traced my finger over the raised seal at the bottom of the foreclosure notice. With one simple phone call to the county sheriff, I could have Preston and Eleanor Kensington physically dragged out of their ancestral home and tossed right onto the public sidewalk. However, evicting them quietly on a random Thursday afternoon lacked the dramatic public accountability they so deeply deserved. Preston was currently strutting around Atlanta, aggressively playing the role of the wealthy, protective older brother, while secretly using my ex-fiancé's corporate paycheck to keep the lights on. Eleanor was gleefully playing the innocent superior bride, looking down her nose at the world, while actively hiding from aggressive debt collectors. They were both dangerous, manipulative frauds who needed to be exposed in the exact same brutal manner they used to mistreat others. I wanted Marcus to look at the undeniable proof of his own monumental stupidity. I wanted Beatrice to choke on the bitter reality of her desperate, pathetic social climbing. Therefore, I decided to hold the foreclosure documents tightly in my possession. I would hand-deliver the ultimate eviction notice directly to Preston in front of his entire network of superficial elite guests. I carefully gathered the most damning pieces of financial evidence from the sprawling pile on my table. I selected the official debt transfer confirmation, the finalized bankruptcy filings for the Kensington Logistics Company, and the heavily stamped notice of default for their family mansion. I neatly folded these explosive documents and slid them into a sleek, unassuming manila envelope. This simple, unmarked envelope was going to serve as my primary weapon of mass destruction. I placed it gently inside my designer clutch, right next to my favorite shade of dark crimson lipstick. I looked over at my beautiful daughters, who were now busy stacking colorful wooden blocks into a tall, unstable tower. Brielle placed one final block on the very top, and the entire structure instantly collapsed across the soft mat. The girls erupted into a chorus of delighted, unbothered giggles. I smiled warmly at my fierce little warriors. Exactly, I whispered softly to my toddlers, my voice filled with an unshakable, profound certainty. When a foundation is built on absolutely nothing, it is incredibly easy to knock the whole thing down. I had successfully acquired the leverage required to completely obliterate the Kensington family's fake financial empire. I legally owned every single one of their massive, overwhelming corporate debts. I legally owned their prestigious, heavily guarded ancestral home outright. I held their entire fraudulent, pathetic existence squarely in the palm of my hand, firmly gripping the undeniable proof of their devastating social demise. But a truly spectacular, unforgettable public downfall always requires the absolute perfect stage. I needed to ensure that when I finally confronted them, they would have absolutely nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. I needed to trap them in an environment they believed they controlled. I calmly walked right back to my computer and opened a new encrypted window. It was finally time to secure the absolute perfect battleground. I needed to take a very close look at the exclusive country club where this highly anticipated wedding was supposed to happen. Magnolia Estates Country Club was widely considered the absolute crown jewel of Atlanta's high society. It was a sprawling, fiercely guarded property that boasted a championship golf course, pristine botanical gardens, and a majestic antebellum-style clubhouse that practically oozed old Southern exclusivity. Beatrice had likely wept tears of pure joy when Eleanor Kensington secured this particular venue for the wedding. It was the exact type of highly restricted, pretentiously elite environment that my former mother-in-law had desperately craved her entire life. I pulled up the country club's corporate ownership structure on my encrypted monitor, my fingers flying across the keyboard with calculated precision. Magnolia Estates was not an independent entity. It was actually the flagship property of a much larger corporate conglomerate known as the Sterling Hospitality Group. The Sterling family had owned a massive portfolio of luxury event spaces across the entire state of Georgia for over 4 decades. However, my deep dive into their recent financial disclosures revealed a very familiar, highly exploitable pattern of severe corporate distress. The hospitality group had taken massive financial hits during recent economic downturns, forcing them to quietly liquidate several smaller properties just to keep Magnolia Estates operational. They were incredibly vulnerable. They were secretly drowning in operational debt and actively seeking a silent, wealthy buyer to completely bail them out before the upcoming fiscal quarter ended. I smiled, feeling the familiar, intoxicating rush of a perfectly timed corporate acquisition. I did not just want to ruin Marcus and his pathetic new family at their wedding. I wanted to possess the absolute legal authority to dictate every single aspect of their environment. I immediately opened a secure line to my acquisitions director at Vanguard Holdings. My instructions were crystal clear and completely non-negotiable. We were going to buy the Sterling Hospitality Group, and we were going to do it before the end of the week. My corporate legal team launched into aggressive action. We completely bypassed the standard drawn-out negotiation protocols by offering an overwhelming all-cash buyout that significantly exceeded the current market valuation. The Sterling Board of Directors was absolutely desperate for a fast, quiet exit to avoid public embarrassment. They eagerly accepted my highly lucrative offer without ever demanding to meet the mysterious buyer hiding behind the formidable Vanguard Holdings corporate shield. Within 48 hours, the massive transfer of ownership was completely finalized and legally binding. I sat in my luxurious penthouse office holding the freshly stamped acquisition documents in my hands. I was no longer just the CEO of a highly successful crisis management firm. I was now the sole undisputed owner of the Magnolia Estates Country Club. I legally owned the grand ballroom where Marcus planned to share his first dance. I legally owned the meticulously manicured gardens where Beatrice planned to take her pretentious family photographs. Most importantly, I legally controlled the strict code of conduct policies that governed every single person who stepped onto my newly acquired private property. I pulled up the detailed event schedule for the Kensington wedding, which had been automatically transferred to my corporate server during the massive buyout. They had spent a staggering $80,000 just to rent the venue for a single evening. The sheer financial audacity was incredibly amusing, considering I now held the massive $3 million debt portfolio for the very same family funding the event. Marcus was eagerly pouring his hard-earned corporate salary into a lavish, superficial celebration hosted on property that ultimately belonged to the very woman he had brutally discarded in a hospital parking lot. The profound poetic justice of the entire situation was absolutely intoxicating. I spent the next few days meticulously planning my grand entrance. I contacted my favorite private designer in Atlanta, a brilliant black woman who understood exactly how to craft garments that commanded absolute respect and undeniable authority. I commissioned a breathtaking custom emerald green gown that perfectly matched the ruthless, prosperous energy of my massive corporate empire. The dress was designed to be completely unforgettable, a striking visual representation of the immense wealth and unshakable power I had built entirely from the cold ashes of Marcus's devastating betrayal. I also needed to prepare my three beautiful daughters for their highly anticipated public debut. Aria, Brielle, and Camille were the undeniable proof of Marcus's monumental failures and my spectacular triumphs. I ordered custom matching emerald dresses for my fierce little warriors, ensuring they would look like absolute royalty when we finally crashed this pathetic fake fairy tale wedding. My elite team of private nannies and heavily armed security personnel were fully briefed on the exact timeline of the upcoming operation. We were not going to sneak into the back of the venue like uninvited, desperate guests. We were going to arrive at the main entrance like the undisputed owners of the entire estate. The week of the wedding finally arrived, bringing a palpable electric current of anticipation into my sprawling penthouse. I stood in front of my expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline that I now silently controlled. I had flawlessly executed every single phase of my master plan. I owned the Kensington family's massive corporate debt. I owned the prestigious venue where they planned to celebrate their fake societal elevation. I held the irrefutable DNA evidence proving Marcus abandoned his own biological legacy to chase a bankrupt illusion of white aristocratic status. Every single trap had been perfectly set, and the oblivious targets were eagerly marching right into the center of the kill zone. I turned away from the window and walked toward my daughter's nursery, listening to their sweet, joyful babbling. Tomorrow, they would walk into the Magnolia Estates Country Club, holding the hands of a mother who had conquered the entire world for them. We were going to shatter the fragile, pathetic reality of everyone who had ever dared to treat us like disposable collateral. Done. The morning of the wedding arrived with a crisp, clear blue sky that felt like a personal blessing from the universe. I stood in front of the tall mirror in my master suite, taking a final approving look at my reflection. The custom emerald green gown draped perfectly across my figure, catching the natural light and shimmering with undeniable authority. It was a dress designed for a conqueror, not a guest. Down the hall, my elite team of nannies was putting the finishing touches on my three beautiful daughters. Aria, Brielle, and Camille wore matching emerald dresses made of imported silk with tiny gold ribbons tied neatly in their thick curly hair. They looked like absolute royalty. I kissed each of their foreheads, marveling at how much they had grown and how perfectly they mirrored the man who was currently preparing to marry a bankrupt fraud across town. My private security team escorted us down to the underground garage where a sleek black Maybach was waiting with the engines softly purring. The drive to Magnolia Estates Country Club was a quiet, intensely focused journey. I watched the familiar Atlanta neighborhoods roll past the tinted windows, feeling a profound sense of absolute calm. I was not walking into an ambush. I was the ambush. As my driver pulled into the sprawling, manicured driveway of the prestigious country club, the sheer, audacious scale of the Kensington wedding became glaringly obvious. A massive line of luxury vehicles waited patiently for the busy valet attendants. Extravagant floral arrangements, overflowing with fresh white roses and expensive imported orchids, lined the grand entrance. Marcus and his mother had clearly spared absolutely no expense, enthusiastically burning through his corporate salary to fund this pathetic illusion of old money grandeur. My driver expertly bypassed the crowded valet line, pulling the Maybach directly up to the restricted VIP entrance at the front of the majestic antebellum-style clubhouse. The heavy car doors opened and a warm southern breeze washed over us. I stepped out first, my emerald gown flowing elegantly down the stone steps. My lead security guard carefully helped my daughters out of their car seats. I took Aria and Brielle by their small, warm hands, while Camille happily walked right beside us, completely unbothered by the growing commotion. We confidently walked up the grand staircase and approached the massive oak double doors. The uniformed staff, who were now technically my direct employees, scrambled to pull the heavy doors open for us with deep, respectful bows. We stepped directly into the magnificent foyer of Magnolia Estates. The expansive space was a breathtaking display of bright crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and sweeping staircases. The lavish cocktail hour was already in full swing. Many dozens of wealthy, prominent Atlanta socialites mingled happily in their expensive tuxedos and designer evening gowns. Highly trained professional waiters circulated with silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate gourmet appetizers. The soft classical music from a live string quartet floated gracefully through the warm air. For a brief moment, our arrival went completely unnoticed in the sea of high society loud chatter. I paused perfectly in the center of the grand foyer, allowing the striking visual of a confident, beautifully dressed black woman and three identical toddlers to naturally draw the undivided attention of the room. It did not take long at all. The conversations nearest to the entrance began to falter, quickly replaced by hushed, confused whispers. People slowly turned their heads, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their mouths, openly staring at the unexpected guests crashing their highly exclusive, heavily guarded gathering. Then the absolute and entirely inevitable happened. Across the crowded grand foyer near the towering ice sculpture, perfectly positioned in the center of the room, a familiar, oversized church hat suddenly snapped in my direction. Beatrice had been holding court with a group of older affluent women, likely boasting loudly about her son's prestigious new marriage. I watched her perfectly painted smile completely vanish, instantly replaced by a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She slammed her crystal champagne flute down onto a nearby cocktail table so hard that the expensive liquid splashed over the edges. She quickly excused herself from her wealthy companions with a sharp, rigid nod and began marching aggressively across the marble floor directly toward me. Her eyes were blazing with the exact same toxic, arrogant contempt she had weaponized against me in the hospital parking lot 2 years ago. She was moving with the aggressive, entitled confidence of a woman who genuinely believed she controlled the entire vast universe. She had absolutely no idea that she was currently walking on a floor that I had purchased with cash just 3 days ago. "What in the world is wrong with your mind?" Beatrice hissed, stopping just a few feet away from me to avoid causing a massive public scene. Her chest was heaving with suppressed rage and her eyes darted nervously around the quiet foyer. "How did you even get past the secure front gate? This is a highly restricted elite family event. We certainly do not have space for a bitter barren woman who could not even secure my son's legacy. You need to turn around and walk right back out those doors before I have you thrown out like common street trash." I did not flinch. I did not drop my beautiful daughter's hands. I simply offered her a cold, unbothered smile that made her jaw clench in absolute frustration. "Security guards!" Beatrice suddenly shouted, no longer caring about maintaining her quiet, dignified volume. Her shrill voice echoed loudly, completely stopping the string quartet mid-romantic song. Every single guest in the foyer turned to watch the escalating drama unfold. "Security, get over here immediately. I want this deranged woman physically removed from our wedding reception. She is a crazy, infertile ex-fiancé who is completely obsessed with my son. Get her and her rented little welfare project out of my sight right now." The silence following Beatrice's frantic screaming was deafening. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing, highlighting the awkwardness of the moment. Two security guards hurried from the ballroom entrance, hands resting on their radios. However, they froze upon making eye contact with me. My private security stepped forward, forming an imposing wall between my daughters and the hysterical woman. I did not raise my voice or break my posture. I simply looked down at Beatrice with chilling pity. The elite guests held their breath shamelessly, consuming the drama. "A rented welfare project." I repeated her words, my voice carrying a lethal calm that echoed across the expansive foyer. That is a fascinating choice of vocabulary for a woman who prides herself on Christian values. Take a much closer look at these little girls before you embarrass yourself any further, Beatrice. Put on your designer reading glasses. Put on your designer reading glasses. I stepped aside, allowing the cascading light from the crystal chandeliers to illuminate Irreversible and Camille. The girls stood perfectly still, their striking features on full display. They possessed the exact same almond-shaped eyes, identical strong jawline, and the very distinctive complexion that characterized the arrogant man who brutally discarded me. A collective, highly audible gasp rippled rapidly through the dense crowd of wealthy onlookers. The prominent Atlanta socialites, who had spent decades meticulously analyzing family lineages and scrutinizing genetic resemblances, instantly recognized the undeniable truth standing right in front of them. The whispers immediately ignited, spreading like a rampant wildfire across the lavish cocktail reception. They were eagerly pointing at my daughters, comparing their flawless little faces to the well-known features of the groom they had gathered to celebrate. Beatrice's manicured hands began to tremble violently. Her heavily powdered face drained of all color, transforming her usual haughty expression into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She stared down at the three toddlers, her mouth opening and closing silently as her brain desperately tried to reject the irrefutable biological reality threatening to destroy her carefully constructed social elevation. "Mother, what is going on out here?" The deep, familiar voice sliced through the chaotic murmuring of the stunned crowd. The sea of expensive tuxedos and designer gowns quickly parted, creating a wide, clear path for the groom. Marcus strode into the grand foyer, looking incredibly sleek and thoroughly pretentious in his custom-tailored ivory wedding tuxedo. He wore a look of intense irritation, clearly annoyed that some unforeseen disruption was temporarily drawing attention away from his highly anticipated societal debut. He marched toward the center of the room, fully prepared to scold his mother for causing a scene in front of his wealthy colleagues. He was moving with the absolute blind confidence of a man who firmly believed he had finally secured everything he had ever wanted in his superficial life. His aggressive momentum halted the exact second his eyes locked onto mine. Marcus froze completely, his polished, arrogant demeanor evaporating into thin air. He stared at me in my striking emerald green gown, his eyes widening in profound disbelief. He had spent 2 years actively convincing himself that I was a broken, infertile woman, weeping alone in a tiny, depressing apartment. Now he was staring at a powerful, radiant queen commanding the absolute center of the most exclusive country club in the entire state of Georgia. I offered him a sharp, knowing smile, standing my ground with a formidable grace that clearly terrified him. But the true, devastating shock had not even registered yet. His bewildered gaze slowly drifted downward, following the line of my protective hands. When Marcus finally looked down and saw Aria, Brielle, and Camille standing quietly at my side, his entire body visibly swayed. The expensive crystal tumbler of bourbon slipped right out of his loosened grip. It hit the polished marble floor with a sharp, violent crash, sending amber liquid and shattered glass scattering in every direction. The loud noise made several guests jump, but Marcus did not even flinch. The blood rushed out of his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. I was staring directly at 3 tiny, undeniable reflections of his own face. He was looking at the exact biological legacy he had viciously sacrificed for a fake, bankrupt fantasy. He took a shaky, unstable step forward, his knees literally buckling beneath the crushing weight of his monumental realization. "Tiana." Marcus choked out his voice, barely a weak, raspy whisper. He raised a trembling hand, pointing a shaky finger toward the girls. "Are those or they?" he mumbled quietly to himself. He could not even begin to finish the pathetic sentence. The sheer magnitude of his catastrophic failure was suffocating him right in front of his elite audience. I stepped forward, my designer heels clicking sharply against the floor, stopping just inches away from the shattered glass of his dropped drink. "These are my daughters, Marcus," I announced loudly, ensuring that every single corporate executive and high society gossip in the room heard my words perfectly. "Aria, Brielle, and Camille. They are the beautiful, thriving, healthy children that grew from the severe ovarian cysts you so brutally mocked 2 years ago." Marcus clutched his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic as a full-blown panic attack began to set in. He looked frantically at his horrified mother, then back at me, desperately trying to process the absolute destruction of his reality. "You told me you were completely barren," he stammered, his polished corporate vocabulary entirely failing him. "You told me we were a dead end. You hid my own children from me for 2 entire years. I laughed. A sound so entirely devoid of warmth it made the surrounding guests physically recoil. I did not hide anything from you, Marcus. You abandoned us in a hospital parking lot because you lacked the patience and the basic human decency to wait for a second medical opinion. You threw your flesh and blood away like garbage to chase an empty illusion of aristocratic wealth. The echo of my words hung in the grand foyer like a guillotine waiting to drop. The silence was absolute save for the soft, confused murmurs of the Atlanta elite trying to process the scandalous revelation. Marcus stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The reality of his colossal mistake was physically crushing him. But before he could even attempt to formulate a pathetic excuse, a shrill, piercing scream shattered the quiet elegance of the room. Eleanor pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She was a vision of supposed old money perfection draped in an exorbitant custom lace gown that I knew for a fact was currently sitting on a maxed-out credit card. Her carefully styled blonde hair shook as she marched up to Marcus, her face flushed with pure, unadulterated rage. She looked like a woman who had just realized her entire carefully orchestrated financial lifeboat was sinking. "Marcus!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice cracking in a highly undignified manner. She pointed a shaking finger at my 3 beautiful daughters. "Who are these children? You looked me dead in my eyes and swore to me that your ex-fiancé was a clinically insane childless stalker who refused to let you go. You told my entire family she was completely infertile and obsessed with ruining your life. Are you telling me these are your biological kids?" Marcus frantically reached out to grab her hands, his eyes darting nervously toward the VIP tables near the ballroom entrance. I followed his gaze and spotted Mr. Sterling, the ruthless CEO of the corporate law firm where Marcus worked. Mr. Sterling was watching the entire debacle with deep, undisguised disgust. Marcus knew his upcoming promotion to partner was currently hanging by a very thin, fraying thread. "Eleanor, sweetheart, please calm down," Marcus begged, lowering his voice in a desperate attempt to contain the escalating public humiliation. "Do not do this here. Everyone is staring at us. I can explain everything in private, I promise you. This woman is just trying to manipulate the situation to extort money from me." I let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through his pathetic lies. "Extort money from you, Marcus, please do not flatter yourself. You do not have the kind of capital required to even catch my attention anymore. I am simply here to correct the highly fictional narrative you have been selling to your new broken laws." Eleanor whipped her head around to glare at me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of intense jealousy and profound panic. She was desperately trying to maintain her presumed racial and class superiority, but my calm, unshakable demeanor was completely throwing her off balance. "Shut up!" Eleanor yelled at me, completely abandoning her refined Southern belle persona. "You have no right to be here, you crazy woman. You engineered this entire stunt just to ruin my perfect wedding day because you are bitter and jealous." "I assure you, Eleanor, I have absolutely nothing to be jealous of," I replied, my voice smooth and chillingly polite. "I just wanted to personally deliver your wedding gift. I thought you should know exactly what kind of man you are legally tying yourself to today. He is a coward who runs away at the very first sign of adversity. If he can abandon his own unborn children in a hospital parking lot, what do you think he will do to you when your family's dark financial secrets finally come to light?" Eleanor flinched visibly at my subtle mention of her family's financial secrets. Her panicked eyes darted toward her brother Preston, who was standing a few feet away, his face turning an angry shade of crimson. She quickly turned her wrath back onto Marcus, shoving his hands away from her waist. "Is it true?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising to an almost hysterical pitch. "Did you leave her pregnant? You told me she was the one who ruined the relationship. You told me she was emotionally unstable and completely barren. You lied to my face, Marcus. You lied to my father before he passed away. You stood in our ancestral home and swore you were a man of impeccable honor." Marcus was sweating profusely now. The collar of his expensive tuxedo looked like it was choking him. He looked at Beatrice silently, begging his mother to intervene and save him like she always did. But Beatrice was completely paralyzed, still staring at Aria, Brielle, and Camille in a state of catatonic shock. She was physically unable to tear her eyes away from the living, breathing legacy she had so viciously thrown into the trash. "Eleanor, she is lying," Marcus stammered, running a trembling hand over his sweating forehead. "She must have used a sperm bank. She probably hired a private investigator to track me down and is just using these kids as props. You know how these desperate women are. They see a successful corporate attorney, and they see a walking paycheck. I have never seen these children before in my entire life." The sheer audacity of his lie was absolutely breathtaking. He was willing to publicly deny his own flesh and blood just to save face in front of his wealthy white colleagues and his corporate boss. It was the ultimate display of moral bankruptcy. I did not yell or lose my composure. I simply reached into my custom emerald green clutch and pulled out a thick folded document bearing the official seal of the Fulton County Family Court. I held it up so the surrounding guests, particularly Mr. Sterling, could see the heavy legal stamps. "This is a court-ordered, legally binding DNA paternity test," I announced clearly, making sure my voice carried across the silent foyer. "Conducted and verified 3 months ago when the state required me to formally establish paternity for child support records. It proves with scientific certainty Marcus is the biological father of these 3 girls." The heavy embossed paper of the court document hung in the air, acting as an undeniable guillotine over Marcus and his crumbling web of lies. I held the paternity test steady, allowing the bold black ink of the state seal to visually cement his absolute ruin. A low collective murmur of pure scandal instantly swept through the opulent grand foyer. The prominent Atlanta socialites who just minutes ago had been sipping expensive champagne and admiring the lavish floral arrangements were now shamelessly leaning in to witness the spectacular implosion of this high society wedding. Eleanor stumbled backward, her custom lace gown rustling harshly against the polished marble floor. She covered her mouth with trembling hands, her eyes darting frantically between the heavily stamped legal document in my grasp and the terrified, sweating face of the man she was supposed to marry. Marcus was entirely paralyzed, completely stripped of his usual corporate arrogance. He could not form a single coherent syllable to defend himself against the cold, hard science staring him right in the face. His pristine ivory tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap costume. Before the suffocating silence could completely crush Marcus, a new, highly aggressive energy forcibly shoved its way to the absolute front of the gathering. Preston Kensington, Eleanor's older brother, stepped directly into my personal space. He practically reeked of unearned privilege and generations of unchecked entitlement. Preston was the quintessential picture of arrogant white Southern wealth, dressed in a sharply tailored designer suit with a perfectly styled haircut that screamed exclusive country club membership. He moved with the reckless, blind confidence of a man who had never once been told no in his entire pampered life. He deliberately pushed Marcus aside, treating his soon-to-be brother-in-law with the exact same dismissive contempt one might reserve for a misbehaving servant. Preston clearly viewed himself as the ultimate protector of the Kensington family legacy, and he looked down his aristocratic nose at me as if I were a piece of dirt that had somehow tracked its way into his pristine elite sanctuary. He wanted to intimidate me. "Listen here, lady," Preston sneered tightly, crossing his arms over his broad chest. His voice was loud, commanding, and heavily laced with a sickening layer of racial and classist condescension. "I do not know what kind of pathetic ghetto shakedown you are trying to pull here today, but it is absolutely not going to work. You are making a massive mistake." I did not flinch, maintaining my unshakable posture as I stared directly into his furious pale eyes. I was intentionally trying to assert dominance, using his physical height and his presumed societal superiority. "You think you can just waltz into a highly respectable private family event with some forged government papers and demand a quick paycheck?" Preston continued, taking another aggressive step forward, pointing a threatening finger directly at my face. "My sister is marrying into a prominent corporate firm today. We do not have the time or the patience for your desperate, lower-class extortion tactics. Do you honestly believe anyone in this room is going to believe a woman like you over a man like Marcus?" The sheer breathtaking audacity of his racist microaggressions hung heavily in the tense air. I briefly glanced over at Beatrice, fully expecting a black mother to at least silently object to a privileged white man speaking to another black woman with such blatant racially charged disrespect. Instead, Beatrice was actually nodding in fervent agreement with Preston. She was so incredibly desperate to save this disastrous wedding and secure her fake social elevation that she was perfectly willing to co-sign his deeply offensive insults. The profound hypocrisy was sickening, but it only fueled the roaring fire of my fierce determination. I gently squeezed Brielle in Arya's warm hands, making sure my beautiful daughters remained calm and protected behind the sweeping fabric of my emerald gown. They were entirely oblivious to the vicious, ugly nature of the man towering over us, and I was going to keep it that way. I simply offered Preston a cold, chilling smile, completely refusing to give him the angry, emotional reaction he so desperately wanted to provoke. "I am not here for a paycheck, Preston," I replied, my voice remarkably smooth and dangerously quiet. "I have no need for your money, and I certainly have no need for Marcus's empty promises. I am simply delivering the truth." Preston let out a harsh, barking laugh, shaking his head in mock amusement. "The truth. The truth is that you are a bitter, rejected ex-girlfriend who cannot handle the fact that Marcus upgraded to a woman of actual substance and breeding. You saw the lavish wedding announcements. You realized you missed your chance to secure a wealthy lifestyle, and now you are trying to trap him. Well, I am ending this little theatrical performance right now." He aggressively pulled his sleek, expensive smartphone from his jacket pocket, waving it threateningly in the air. "Take your little welfare project and leave this property immediately. If you do not turn around and walk your fatherless children out those front doors in exactly 10 seconds, I am calling the police and having you formally arrested for criminal trespassing and attempted extortion." His empty, desperate threats washed over me like a completely harmless breeze. Preston was performing his inherited superiority with flawless precision, eagerly playing the role of the valiant, wealthy protector, defending his fragile sister from a scheming outsider. He truly believed his lighter skin and his recognizable last name granted him absolute immunity from consequence. He expected me to cower in fear, to scoop up my precious daughters, and run away crying from the terrifying prospect of law enforcement. He expected me to be intimidated by the enormous financial power he supposedly wielded. But I already knew the spectacular hidden reality hiding behind his aggressive posturing. I knew precisely how completely and utterly broke he truly was today. I did not back down or break eye contact with Preston Kensington for a single fraction of a second. Instead, I slowly unclasped the gold hardware of my custom emerald green clutch. The sharp metallic click echoed loudly in the tense, suffocating silence of the grand foyer. Everyone was watching, waiting for me to crumble under the heavy weight of his racist, classist intimidation tactics. Beatrice was literally holding her breath, practically vibrating with the desperate hope that this arrogant white man would successfully chase me out of the country club. I reached inside my bag and carefully pulled out the thick, unassuming manila envelope I had meticulously prepared. I did not hand it to Marcus, nor did I hand it to Beatrice. I thrust it directly into Preston's chest with enough calculated force to make him physically stumble backward. Preston looked down at the envelope, his pale face contorting into a mask of pure confusion and renewed anger. "What is this supposed to be?" he demanded, treating the heavy packet as if it were highly contagious. "I told you we are not giving you a single dime of our family money. Take your pathetic extortion attempt and get off my property." "Your property," I repeated, tilting my head slightly as a cold, predatory smile spread across my face. "That is an incredibly bold choice of words, Preston, especially coming from a man whose family logistics company officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy just last Tuesday." The entire foyer erupted into a sudden chaotic chorus of shocked gasps. The prominent Atlanta socialites who had spent decades worshipping the Kensington family name were now openly staring with their mouths hanging wide open. Eleanor let out a loud, high-pitched shriek, dropping her expensive bridal bouquet right onto the polished marble floor. The white roses scattered everywhere, looking just as crushed and pathetic as her fake aristocratic facade. "What did you just say?" Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking hysterically as she lunged toward her brother. "Preston, what is she talking about? Tell them she is lying." Preston was no longer looking at me. His arrogant, superior demeanor had vanished entirely. He was staring down at the thick stack of papers he had just pulled from the manila envelope. His hands were shaking so violently that the crisp, notarized documents were loudly rustling in the quiet room. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. I was staring directly at the official debt transfer confirmation and the heavily stamped notice of default for his prized ancestral mansion. Your family's legendary old money dried up an entire decade ago, Preston. I continued, making sure my voice carried across the room to the corporate executives standing near the ballroom entrance. You have been desperately dodging aggressive debt collectors for months. You pushed your sister to marry Marcus because his lucrative corporate salary was going to quietly bail you out of your massive financial failures, did you not? Marcus whipped his head around to look at Eleanor, his eyes wide with absolute terror. You are bankrupt! Marcus shouted, completely forgetting to maintain his polished professional image. You told me your trust fund was tied up in offshore investments. You told me your family owned half the real estate in Buckhead. They do not own a single thing, Marcus, I said cheerfully, thoroughly enjoying the spectacular destruction of his fake, highly curated reality. They are drowning in $3 million of highly toxic debt. The bank was actively preparing to foreclose on that sprawling, heavily guarded mansion you have been bragging about to all of your corporate colleagues. Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic wail, clutching the pearls around her neck as if she were physically suffocating. No, Beatrice cried out, looking frantically between Marcus and the humiliated white family she had worshipped. This cannot be true. They are the Kensingtons. They are a pillar of Atlanta high society. They are absolute frauds, Beatrice, I corrected her sharply. Just like you. You threw away your own beautiful, healthy grandchildren to chase a completely bankrupt illusion. Preston finally found his voice, though it lacked any of the commanding racist authority he had wielded just moments ago. How did you get these documents? Preston stammered, his eyes darting nervously around the room. These are highly classified financial records. Apex Capital promised us absolute discretion during the restructuring process. Apex Capital lacked the aggressive legal muscle to properly collect on your massive defaults. I explained smoothly, taking a confident step toward him. So they gladly sold your entire $3 million debt portfolio to Vanguard Holdings at a 10% premium on Wednesday morning. I know this because I am the founder and absolute sole owner of Vanguard Holdings. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy, thick with the undeniable weight of my massive, unshakable power. Preston literally choked on his own breath. The realization hit him with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. He was not looking at a desperate lower-class ex-girlfriend seeking a quick welfare paycheck. He was staring directly into the cold, ruthless eyes of his brand-new master. I bought your family's debt, Preston. I stated clearly, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. I bought the foreclosure papers for your precious ancestral estate. You do not own the house you are currently sleeping in tonight. I do. So I highly suggest you watch your incredibly disrespectful tone when you are speaking directly to your new landlord. Preston's knees actually buckled slightly. He reached out and grabbed the edge of a nearby cocktail table just to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. The racial and classist power dynamic he had relied on his entire pampered life was completely flipped, entirely reversed in a matter of minutes. He was entirely at my absolute mercy, and he knew I did not possess a single ounce of forgiveness. I was the undisputed queen, and his pathetic game was over. Eleanor stood frozen amidst the scattered white roses, her chest heaving as she stared at her brother. Preston could not even lift his head to meet her gaze. His silence was a damning confession that echoed louder than any shout could have. The glamorous, untouchable Kensington legacy had just been reduced to a pile of unpaid bills held by a black woman in an emerald gown. Eleanor turned her furious, tear-filled eyes toward Marcus. The man she was supposed to marry in less than an hour was currently sweating profusely, looking entirely pathetic in his custom ivory tuxedo. He had been so eager to purchase a seat at the aristocratic table that he completely failed to realize the table was being repossessed. Marcus! Eleanor demanded, her voice trembling with a toxic mixture of panic and deep humiliation. Did you know about this? Did you know my family was filing for bankruptcy? Is this some kind of sick, twisted joke you arranged with your crazy ex-girlfriend to humiliate us in front of all our friends? I had absolutely no idea, Marcus shouted back, his polished corporate demeanor completely replaced by raw, frantic desperation. He gestured wildly toward the thick stack of foreclosure documents currently trembling in Preston's hands. Your brother explicitly told me the Kensington Trust Fund was locked up in aggressive overseas investments. He asked me for a temporary 6-month bridge loan to cover the wedding expenses and some minor estate maintenance. I gave him $200,000 of my own savings just last week. He swore he would pay me back with interest. Oh, Marcus, you really are incredibly gullible, I said, offering him a smile that contained absolutely zero warmth. Preston did not use your hard-earned corporate salary to maintain his majestic ancestral estate. He used your money to pay off the aggressive collection agencies that have been threatening to seize his luxury vehicles. He saw a desperate status-obsessed man who was incredibly eager to buy his way into white high society, and he played you for an absolute fool. You drained your own bank accounts to fund a fake bankrupt lifestyle. The collective gasps from the surrounding country club guests grew significantly louder. The elite crowd of prominent Atlanta socialites, business moguls, and generational wealth heirs were shamelessly consuming the spectacular destruction of the Kensington family. The very people Eleanor and Preston had spent years looking down upon were now openly whispering, pointing, and judging them without a single ounce of mercy. The rigid, unforgiving class hierarchy of Atlanta high society is incredibly brutal. Once the illusion of money vanishes, the social execution is immediate and completely permanent. Preston finally found his voice, though it sounded weak and incredibly strained. "This is not over," Preston muttered, taking a shaky step toward me. I was desperately trying to salvage some tiny fraction of his dignity in front of his wealthy peers. "You might have purchased our debt through some shady backdoor corporate loophole, but we still have highly connected lawyers. We will tie this up in appellate court for years. You will never set foot inside our home." "Your home." I laughed, a sharp, ringing sound that cut right through his pathetic bravado. "Preston, you need to read the final page of that document you are holding. Vanguard Holdings did not just purchase your debt. We purchased the finalized court-approved auction deed from Apex Capital. The appeals process expired yesterday afternoon. I am not going to tie this up in court. I am going to have the county sheriff legally change the locks on Monday morning. You and your sister need to start packing your designer bags tonight." Eleanor let out another piercing wail, covering her face with her hands. The reality of her impending homelessness was finally crashing down upon her carefully styled head. She spun around to face her brother, completely abandoning her refined Southern belle persona. "You promised me everything was fine," she screamed at Preston. "You promised me this wedding would fix all our financial problems. You told me Marcus was going to secure our future." The sheer ugliness of their transactional fraudulent relationship was now entirely exposed for the entire world to see. Marcus looked physically ill. He had brutally discarded me and his own unborn children to build a prestigious legacy with a woman who only viewed him as a convenient walking bank account. Before Marcus could even attempt to salvage his dignity, Beatrice suddenly pushed her way past him. Just moments ago, she had been ferociously defending the Kensington family and eagerly demanding that security throw me out onto the street. Now that she realized her precious wealthy white in-laws were entirely bankrupt, her allegiance shifted with whiplash-inducing speed. "You deceitful, wicked people!" Beatrice yelled, pointing a manicured finger directly at Eleanor. She conveniently ignored her own massive hypocrisy as she loudly addressed the stunned crowd. "You lured my brilliant, successful son into a trap. You tried to use his hard-earned corporate wealth to cover up your pathetic failures. Marcus, we are leaving this disastrous event right now. We do not associate with liars and frauds. Do not you dare act like the victim here, Beatrice," I warned her, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, commanding register. "You enthusiastically supported this fraudulent marriage because you were absolutely desperate for a reserved seat at their exclusive country club table. You practically worshipped the ground Eleanor walked on just because of her last name and her pale skin. You are just as fake greedy and morally bankrupt as the people you are currently yelling at. Beatrice froze her eyes, darting nervously toward the wealthy onlookers. She realized she was rapidly losing control of the narrative. The power dynamic in the grand foyer had entirely inverted. The Kensingtons were exposed as desperate broke frauds. Marcus was revealed as a gullible, status-obsessed fool who had been thoroughly scammed. Her entire facade completely vanished. The crushing reality of my words left Beatrice completely speechless. She stood frozen in the center of the grand foyer, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The devastating humiliation was entirely overwhelming for her. Marcus quickly realized that his mother could no longer protect him. He frantically scanned the room and locked eyes with Mr. Sterling, the powerful chief executive officer of his corporate law firm. Mr. Sterling was standing near the ballroom entrance with his arms firmly crossed, shaking his head in absolute disgust. Marcus knew that his highly anticipated promotion to senior partner was currently evaporating into thin air. Corporate law firms in Atlanta placed a massive premium on pristine public images and impeccable family values. A messy, highly public scandal involving a pregnant ex-fiancé and a fraudulent, bankrupt bride was the exact type of severe moral liability that would instantly terminate a lucrative career. Marcus needed to salvage his reputation immediately, and he needed to do it in front of his wealthy boss. He took a very deep breath, smoothing down the lapels of his expensive ivory tuxedo and completely shifted his entire demeanor. The frantic, sweating coward vanished. In his place stood a highly trained manipulative attorney desperately trying to control the narrative. He took several slow, measured steps toward me and my 3 beautiful daughters. He crouched down slightly, plastering a look of profound manufactured sorrow across his face. He actually managed to force a single, fake tear to well up in the corner of his eye. "Tiana," Marcus said, his voice dripping with forced sincerity and loud enough for the surrounding corporate executives to hear. "I was completely lost and confused 2 years ago. I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake out of pure ignorance. But looking at these beautiful little girls right now changes absolutely everything. Aria, Brielle, and Camille. They are my precious flesh and blood. I am a God-fearing man, and I firmly believe a father belongs in the lives of his children. I want joint custody, Tiana. I demand to be an active, loving father to my daughters starting this exact second. We can go to court and establish a proper co-parenting schedule. I will pay whatever child support is necessary to ensure my legacy is fully protected." Eleanor let out a sharp, hysterical gasp. She grabbed the shredded remains of her expensive lace veil, staring at Marcus as if he had grown a second head. "Are you completely insane?" Eleanor shrieked, completely forgetting her polished Southern etiquette. "You are standing at our expensive wedding reception, demanding joint custody of 3 random toddlers you literally just met. You just told me you had absolutely no idea they even existed 10 short minutes ago. This is an absolute nightmare." Preston grabbed his sister by the arm, roughly pulling her back. He realized Marcus was desperately trying to pivot to save his corporate job effectively, throwing the bankrupt Kensington family right under the bus to look like a responsible, upstanding patriarch. The sheer, shameless manipulation was almost impressive in its absolute depravity. But my daughters were not going to be used as convenient social props for a man who had treated their existence like a contagious disease. I gently pulled Aria, Brielle, and Camille slightly behind my flowing emerald gown, shielding their innocent eyes from his toxic theatrical performance. "You are an incredibly talented actor, Marcus," I replied, keeping my voice chillingly calm and perfectly projected. "If I did not know you better, I might actually believe this sudden, overwhelming surge of paternal devotion. But we both know you do not care about these girls. You only care about the wealthy man standing over by the ballroom doors. You are terrified that Mr. Sterling is going to fire you for causing a massive public scandal. You think that pretending to be a loving, responsible father will somehow magically repair your shattered professional reputation. You want to use my children to secure your partnership at the law firm." Marcus stood up straight, feigning deep personal offense at my accurate accusation. That is entirely untrue and deeply unfair, he protested loudly, gesturing dramatically toward the silent crowd. I have a fundamental legal right to be a father to my biological children. You cannot keep my own daughters away from me, just because you are holding a lingering grudge over a past relationship. The family court system in Georgia strongly favors joint custody, and no judge will deny a successful, financially stable corporate attorney access to his children. I could not help but laugh. It was a sharp, biting sound that echoed off the high marble ceilings. His arrogant assumption that he could simply demand access to my empire after abandoning me was the ultimate display of male entitlement. You are absolutely right about one thing, Marcus, I said, reaching into my custom designer clutch for the third and final time. The family court system does take these matters very seriously. That is exactly why I hired a highly discreet, aggressive family lawyer 3 months ago. I pulled out a stapled packet of legal documents printed on heavy blue paper. My lawyer contacted you anonymously through your private corporate email. I informed you that an unnamed former partner was seeking retroactive child support for a multiple birth pregnancy. He deliberately did not mention my name, and he certainly did not mention that the mother was a multi-million-dollar CEO. He simply presented you with a choice. You could accept the financial responsibility of the children, or you could voluntarily and permanently terminate your parental rights to avoid paying a single dime of child support. You eagerly signed these binding relinquishment papers without asking a single question. You legally abandoned them twice, Marcus. You have absolutely no rights to my daughters whatsoever today. The judge finalized this termination order last week, effectively severing any biological claim you ever possessed. You are nothing to them. You are just a stranger. The devastating finality of my words struck Marcus like a physical blow, leaving him visibly gasping for air. He stared at the blue legal relinquishment papers in my hand, fully comprehending that his desperate 11th-hour attempt to play the devoted patriarch had failed spectacularly. He had permanently signed away his own flesh and blood just to save a few dollars, and now that cowardly decision was broadcasted to the most elite social circle in Atlanta. The suffocating silence in the grand foyer was suddenly broken by the sharp, authoritative sound of slow clapping. The sea of shocked wedding guests immediately parted, creating a wide path for a tall, distinguished older white man with silver hair and an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. It was Mr. Sterling, the ruthless chief executive officer of the prestigious corporate law firm where Marcus had spent the last 5 years blindly sacrificing his soul. Mr. Sterling did not look amused. He looked absolutely furious, his pale blue eyes practically boring a hole right through Marcus's sweating forehead. Marcus physically shrank backward, instinctively trying to hide behind Eleanor's massive ruined wedding gown. But there was absolutely nowhere left for him to run. Mr. Sterling, Marcus stammered, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch as he desperately tried to salvage the unsalvageable. Sir, please let me explain this situation. This is merely a highly unfortunate private family dispute. This woman is simply an incredibly vindictive former partner who is actively trying to sabotage my personal happiness. It has absolutely nothing to do with my professional capabilities or my upcoming promotion to senior partner tomorrow morning. I swear to you, my dedication to this firm remains my absolute top priority. Mr. Sterling stopped walking and stood perfectly still, looking at Marcus with the exact same revulsion one might reserve for a crushed insect on the bottom of an expensive shoe. A private family dispute. Mr. Sterling repeated, his voice dangerously quiet and laced with heavy aristocratic disdain. Marcus, you are standing in the middle of a country club screaming at a woman holding court-mandated DNA tests. You have just been publicly outed for financially defrauding your prospective in-laws and legally abandoning your own biological children to dodge basic child support. That is not a private dispute. That is a colossal, glaring ethical catastrophe. Beatrice, who had been hyperventilating in a nearby chair, suddenly jumped up to defend her precious son's failing career. Mr. Sterling, please forgive him, she pleaded, completely abandoning her usual haughty church persona. My son is a brilliant attorney. He works 90-hour weeks for your company. You cannot let this jealous, bitter woman destroy everything he has built over a simple misunderstanding. Mr. Sterling ignored Beatrice entirely, slowly turning his attention away from the trembling groom and focusing his sharp gaze directly onto me. The intense hostility in his eyes immediately vanished, replaced by a look of profound, genuine professional respect. He stepped forward and extended his right hand toward me. "Ms. Tiana," Mr. Sterling said warmly, offering a slight deferential bow of his head. "It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you in person. My board of directors has been singing your praises all week. I only wish our initial face-to-face introduction could have occurred under much more civilized circumstances." I smoothly shifted the legal documents into my left hand and firmly shook the hand of one of the most powerful corporate leaders in the state. "The pleasure is entirely mine, Mr. Sterling," I replied with a bright, victorious smile. Though I must admit witnessing this particular crisis unfold in real time certainly validates the urgent necessity of our new working relationship. Eleanor let out a confused sob, aggressively wiping the ruined mascara from her cheeks. "Wait, what are you talking about?" she demanded, looking frantically between me, her bankrupt brother Preston, and the intimidating CEO. "Why is the head of the biggest law firm in Georgia shaking hands with this ghetto welfare mother, Marcus? What is going on here?" Marcus was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving as the horrifying realization began to set in. He finally understood that I was not just a successful entrepreneur. I was operating on a corporate level he could only dream of reaching. "Eleanor, shut your mouth," Marcus hissed at his bride, his panic overriding his fake chivalry. He turned back to his boss, his hands clasped together in a pathetic begging gesture. "Sir, you know her. How could our firm possibly be associated with her?" Mr. Sterling let out a dry chuckle. "Associated with her, Marcus, you absolute fool, Ms. Tiana is the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings. Her elite crisis management agency is the absolute best in the country. Our board of directors just retained her firm on a 5-year multi-million-dollar exclusive contract to handle all our high-level corporate public relations and structural damage control." I took a step forward, ensuring my voice carried across the silent, captivated room. "That is exactly right, Marcus," I said cheerfully. "When your firm approached my agency last month, they were desperate to clean up their public image after that messy embezzlement scandal in their accounting department. I agreed to take them on as a premium client, but I insisted on one very specific non-negotiable stipulation before I would sign that lucrative contract. I demanded that they implement an incredibly strict morality clause for all current and future senior partners. My agency refuses to represent any entity that employs executives with a documented history of severe ethical misconduct, financial fraud, or egregious moral failures." Marcus physically staggered backward, bumping hard into the tall, melting ice sculpture. He knew exactly what was coming next. Signing away 3 biological children through anonymous channels specifically to evade lawful child support is the absolute definition of an egregious moral failure, I concluded, staring through his terrified eyes. I turned slightly toward his boss. "Is that not correct, Mr. Sterling?" Mr. Sterling did not hesitate for a single second. "That is absolutely correct, Ms. Tiana," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Our firm operates on strict ethical guidelines. Marcus, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to clean out your office on Monday morning. Do not ever contact my firm again." Marcus crumpled, dropping to his knees on the polished marble floor. He buried his face in his hands, completely broken. The prestigious corporate legacy he had sacrificed his own flesh and blood to build was now entirely reduced to dust. Beatrice stood completely frozen. Her eyes darted from the weeping shell of her son to the imposing figure of Mr. Sterling, and finally they landed squarely on me. The gears in her status-obsessed mind were turning with frantic, dizzying speed. She was finally processing the monumental reality of the situation. I was not a struggling single mother begging for a handout. I was the incredibly wealthy, undisputed chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings. I possessed the multi-million-dollar fortune she had spent her entire superficial life desperately chasing. In a display of breathtaking psychological whiplash, Beatrice completely abandoned her previous hostility. Her face instantly morphed into a mask of exaggerated, overwhelming joy. She clapped her hands together and let out a loud theatrical wail that sounded suspiciously like a church choir solo. "Oh, praise the Lord Almighty!" Beatrice shouted, raising both her hands toward the crystal chandeliers. "God is so incredibly good, He has brought my precious family back together." She aggressively pushed past a stunned Eleanor and completely ignored her weeping son on the floor. She marched directly toward me with her arms stretched wide open, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered across her heavily powdered face. She was staring greedily at my 3 daughters, her eyes practically gleaming with dollar signs. "My beautiful, perfect grandbabies," Beatrice cooed, altering her voice into a high-pitched, sugary tone. "I knew the good Lord would reunite us, Tiana, my sweet girl. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. You hid these precious angels from us, but we can finally be a proper God-fearing family now. You are coming home with us right now. We will take full custody of these girls and raise them with all the prestigious values of our prominent church." I immediately stepped forward, using my own body as an impenetrable emerald green shield between my daughters and her toxic, grasping hands. "Do not take another step toward my children, Beatrice," I warned her, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. "If you even attempt to touch them, I will have my private security team physically throw you through those front doors." Beatrice halted, pressing a dramatic hand against her chest, as if I had deeply wounded her Christian spirit. "Tiana, how can you speak to me with such hostility?" she gasped, looking around the grand foyer to ensure the wealthy guests were watching her perform the role of the innocent, loving grandmother. "I am simply trying to embrace my own bloodline. The church teaches us to forgive and forget. We need to heal this fractured family." "Forgive and forget." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut right through her pathetic theatrical performance. "That is a fascinating scripture for you to quote. Beatrice, let us talk about your deeply rooted Christian values. Were you practicing forgiveness when you cornered me in that hospital parking lot 2 years ago? Were you relying on your prominent church teachings when you ruthlessly ripped the diamond engagement ring right off my finger and called me a broken, empty vessel?" The surrounding high society guests gasped audibly. Beatrice's fake pious smile instantly vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. She realized I was not going to play along with her sudden, convenient amnesia. "You stood on that blistering concrete and told me I was completely useless." I continued, projecting my voice so every single person in the room heard the undeniable truth. "You told me I had absolutely nothing to offer your prestigious family because you wrongly believed I was entirely barren. You happily encouraged your son to abandon his unborn children because you wanted him to marry into white old money. Now that you realize the white old money is totally bankrupt, and the black woman you brutally discarded is a multi-million-dollar executive, you suddenly want to play the role of the loving grandmother. You are a shameless, opportunistic hypocrite." "That is a lie!" Beatrice shrieked, completely dropping her soft, grandmotherly tone. "I never said those things. You are trying to ruin my good standing in the community." "I do not need to ruin your standing, Beatrice," I replied smoothly. "You did that yourself. You sit in the front pew of your elite megachurch every single Sunday wearing your oversized hats and judging every other woman in the congregation. You pretend to be a pillar of morality, but your soul is entirely rotten with greed. You do not love Aria, Brielle, and Camille. You do not even know them. You only see them as shiny new accessories to parade around your country club mixers. You only see my bank accounts. You want access to the Vanguard Holdings wealth, and you are using my children as your pathetic bargaining chips." Marcus finally lifted his head from the floor, his face streaked with tears and utter despair. "Mom, just stop," he pleaded weakly. "It is over. We lost everything." Beatrice ignored him, glaring at me with the same vicious hatred she possessed 2 years ago. The mask was completely off. "You think your money makes you better than us?" She hissed, her fists clenched tightly at her sides, trembling with rage. "You think you can just march into this exclusive venue and freely disrespect us? We proudly paid a massive financial fortune just to rent this majestic space." "A massive fortune?" I asked with a chilling, predatory smile. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, letting my gaze sweep over the lavishly decorated grand foyer. The exorbitant floral arrangements and towering ice sculptures suddenly looked incredibly cheap. Beatrice recoiled as if I had physically struck her, finally understanding that her pathetic attempts at manipulation were completely useless against me. She had played her final card and lost spectacularly. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with a desperate, chaotic mixture of profound humiliation and sudden explosive rage. His tailored ivory tuxedo was wrinkled and stained with the spilled bourbon from his earlier panic. He realized his corporate career was dead, his wealthy bride was utterly broke, and his mother's fake high society persona was thoroughly destroyed. With nothing left to lose, he lunged toward me, only to be instantly blocked by the massive, imposing wall of my elite private security team. "Get out of here, Tiana!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed a shaking finger at the heavy oak double doors. "You came here and ruined my entire life. You destroyed my job and my wedding. I want you and your security guards off this property right this very second." Preston quickly stepped up beside him, his arrogant, aristocratic entitlement flaring up one last time, despite knowing his family was bankrupt and at my financial mercy. Preston firmly believed his whiteness and his gender granted him absolute authority in this elite country club. He puffed out his chest, glaring at my protective detail with sheer, unadulterated contempt. "You heard the man." Preston barked loudly, waving his hand toward the ballroom entrance where venue staff members were nervously watching the commotion. "We paid $80,000 in cash to rent out Magnolia Estates Country Club for this event. We are VIP clients and we demand that you remove this trespassing woman immediately. Call the general manager. Call the police. I want her arrested for disturbing the peace and threatening our guests." The head of venue security, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Frank, stepped forward from the shadows of the grand staircase. He wore a crisp, dark suit with an earpiece resting discreetly in his left ear. Preston and Marcus both let out loud sighs of aggressive relief, genuinely believing that the country club staff was finally arriving to execute their racist, classist demands. Eleanor even stopped crying for a brief moment, wiping her tear-streaked face, hoping to finally see me humiliated and dragged out into the sweltering Atlanta heat. "Frank, thank goodness you are here," Preston said haughtily, snapping his fingers at the head of security, as if summoning an obedient dog. "This deranged woman crashed our $80,000 wedding reception. She is violently harassing the bridal party and bringing unauthorized children into an adult-only event. I expect a full refund for this massive security breach, but first I want you to escort her and her little welfare project off the premises." Frank did not even glance at Preston. He walked directly past the furious bankrupt aristocrat and stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. To the absolute horror of Marcus, Beatrice, Eleanor, and Preston, Frank stood at strict attention and delivered a deep, highly respectful bow. "Good evening, Ms. Tiana," Frank said, his voice booming with undeniable professional reverence. "The perimeter is completely secure, and my entire team is currently standing by for your direct orders. How would you like us to handle this escalating noise disturbance in the main foyer?" The collective synchronized gasp from the elite wedding guests was loud enough to rival a thunderclap. Marcus staggered backward, his mouth hanging wide open. Preston's jaw hit the floor, his pale face turning a sickening shade of gray. Beatrice clutched her chest, leaning heavily against a cocktail table to keep from passing out. "What are you doing?" Preston shrieked, his voice rising to an incredibly high, panicked pitch. He stared at the head of security as if the man had suddenly grown horns. "I am the client. I rented this entire facility. You work for Magnolia Estates. You are supposed to throw her out, not bow to her like she is the Queen of England." I gently squeezed Arya and Brielle's small hands, making sure my beautiful daughters were safely tucked behind the sweeping, luxurious folds of my emerald green gown. I turned my attention back to the pathetic, screaming men standing in front of me. I allowed a bright, victorious laugh to escape my lips, savoring the absolute intoxicating perfection of this monumental reckoning. "He works for Magnolia Estates, Preston," I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried across the silent, captivated room. "That part is entirely true. However, you failed to conduct a proper background check on the corporate ownership structure of this prestigious venue before you blindly handed over your $80,000 rental fee." I reached into my custom designer clutch for the final time. I did not pull out a DNA test or a foreclosure notice. I pulled out a heavy solid brass keycard engraved with the Magnolia Estates crest and the Vanguard Holdings corporate logo. I held it up so the bright chandelier light caught the shining metal. Magnolia Estates Country Club was the flagship property of the Sterling Hospitality Group. I explained smoothly, watching the devastating realization slowly wash over their terrified faces. They were secretly drowning in operational debt and actively seeking a silent buyer to completely bail them out. In a highly aggressive all-cash corporate buyout, Vanguard Holdings successfully acquired the entire hospitality group just 2 weeks ago. I lowered the brass keycard and locked eyes with Marcus, delivering the ultimate lethal strike to his shattered reality. "You paid $80,000 to rent this venue, Marcus," I said, my voice dripping with cold, unshakable authority. "But I own the venue. I am the absolute undisputed owner of Magnolia Estates Country Club. You are currently standing in my house." The sheer weight of my declaration struck the grand foyer with the force of a catastrophic earthquake. Marcus staggered backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished marble floor. He looked frantically at Frank, the towering head of security, praying for someone to expose my claim as a vicious lie. Frank simply folded his hands behind his back, his rigid posture confirming my absolute supremacy over the entire estate. Preston Kensington opened his mouth to argue, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The arrogant, aristocratic white man was suddenly stripped of all his inherited power, realizing he was entirely at the mercy of the black woman he had just threatened to arrest. "Frank," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and professionally detached, "Magnolia Estates has a very strict zero-tolerance policy regarding guests who engage in public harassment, verbal abuse, and severe ethical misconduct. Preston Kensington and his family have flagrantly violated our terms of service. Marcus has caused a massive disruption that threatens the peace and safety of our elite clientele. You are officially authorized to terminate this private event immediately. Please escort the bride, the groom, and their respective families off my property right this very second." "Understood, Ms. Tiana," Frank replied without a single moment of hesitation. He raised his radio to his mouth, speaking in crisp, tactical commands. "All units initiate a full eviction for the Kensington wedding party. Shut down the ballroom, cut the music, and lock the main gates. The event is officially canceled." Within seconds, a dozen highly trained security officers marched into the grand foyer, forming an intimidating, impenetrable wall of dark suits. The string quartet hastily packed away their expensive instruments, and the professional waitstaff immediately began clearing the silver trays of champagne. The lavish $80,000 fairy tale wedding was being systematically dismantled right in front of their horrified eyes. Eleanor Kensington finally reached her absolute breaking point. The devastating reality of her situation violently crashed down upon her. She was not marrying a wealthy corporate savior who could magically erase her family's $3 million debt. She was marrying an unemployed, publicly disgraced fraud who had just been fired by his powerful CEO and who possessed 3 biological children he had ruthlessly abandoned. Her delicate, refined Southern belle facade completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. "You disgusting, pathetic liar!" Eleanor shrieked at Marcus, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She aggressively shoved her hands against his chest, forcing him to stumble into the melting ice sculpture. "You promised me financial security. You swore you were a senior partner with a pristine reputation. You are completely broke, you do not have a job, and you have 3 random kids standing in the lobby. You absolutely ruined my life." Marcus raised his trembling hands, desperately trying to calm his hysterical bride while glancing nervously at the approaching security team. "Eleanor, please, we can figure this out. My savings can cover our immediate expenses. We can still get married and fix this mess together." "There is no together, Marcus!" Eleanor screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing painfully against the high ceilings. She violently yanked the massive diamond engagement ring off her left hand. The very same ring Marcus had likely purchased by draining his remaining corporate bonuses. With a feral, aggressive scream, Eleanor hurled the heavy diamond directly at his face. The ring struck Marcus squarely on the cheekbone, leaving a bright red scratch before bouncing off the marble floor and rolling completely out of sight. Eleanor aggressively hiked up the heavy, expensive layers of her custom lace wedding gown and turned her back on him. She sprinted frantically toward the grand entrance, sobbing hysterically as she fled the country club in absolute disgrace. Preston immediately chased after his weeping sister, his face burning with a toxic mixture of intense shame and helpless fury. Beatrice watched the wealthy white family she had desperately worshipped literally run out the door. The horrifying realization that she was officially tied to a ruined, unemployed son finally snapped her fragile grip on reality. Beatrice aggressively spun around and lunged toward Preston before he could escape, completely abandoning her pious church lady persona. "You scheming bankrupt con artist!" Beatrice yelled, grabbing the sleeve of Preston's tailored jacket. "You tried to use my brilliant son to pay off your toxic mortgages. You people are nothing but broke, pathetic trash hiding behind a fancy last name." Preston violently yanked his arm out of her frantic grasp, looking down at Beatrice with raw, unfiltered disgust. "Do not ever touch me." Preston spat back, his aristocratic arrogance flaring up despite his spectacular downfall. "Your son is an unemployed, unethical loser who abandons his own children. He deserved to be scammed. You two are an absolute embarrassment to this entire city." The racial and classist alliance they had formed to intimidate me completely imploded, devolving into a vicious, humiliating screaming match. Beatrice and Preston were aggressively cursing at each other in the center of the grand foyer, providing the ultimate dramatic entertainment for the shocked Atlanta elite. The prominent corporate executives and wealthy socialites were openly recording the chaotic meltdown on their smartphones, guaranteeing that this disastrous wedding would be the front-page gossip of every exclusive circle by tomorrow morning. Frank and his security team moved in with swift, uncompromising authority. They physically separated the screaming families, gripping them firmly by the arms. "It is time to leave the premises," Frank commanded, his voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Walk out the front doors right now, or we will physically carry you out and call the local police department for criminal trespassing." Marcus fell to his knees in the middle of the luxurious foyer. The security guards grabbed his shoulders, attempting to pull him to his feet, but all the strength had completely left his body. He looked like a completely shattered, empty shell of a man. Frank's security personnel hauled Marcus completely off the polished marble floor. His expensive ivory tuxedo was now entirely rumpled and stained, a perfect physical manifestation of his completely ruined life. He offered absolutely no resistance as two broad-shouldered guards effortlessly dragged him toward the grand exit. Beatrice remained collapsed near the melting ice sculpture, her oversized church hat knocked completely askew. She was violently sobbing, desperately clutching at the expensive fabric of her dress, mourning the absolute death of her fake high society elevation. She had ruthlessly worshipped white aristocratic wealth, and now that very same wealth had completely evaporated into thin air, leaving her publicly disgraced and tied to an unemployed, fraudulent son. Preston Kensington stood frozen in the corner, his pale face drained of all his inherited arrogance. The wealthy Atlanta elite, the very people he had spent his entire privileged life trying to impress, were actively recording his spectacular downfall on their smartphones. The harsh, unforgiving flash of camera lenses illuminated the profound devastation of a family that had built their entire identity on toxic debt and racial superiority. The rigid, unforgiving class hierarchy of Atlanta high society was currently executing them without a single ounce of mercy. I did not stay to watch the bitter, pathetic tears fall. I had absolutely no desire to witness the final humiliating moments of their complete destruction. The profound justice I had meticulously orchestrated was already entirely complete. They were left with absolutely no money, no lavish wedding, no prestigious corporate jobs, and irreparably ruined reputations. They had brutally attempted to bury me in a hospital parking lot 2 years ago, completely unaware that I was a deeply planted seed. I turned my back on the chaotic, screaming mess of the broken Kensington and Brooks families. I gently squeezed the warm, tiny hands of Brielle and Aria, while Camille confidently walked right beside me. "Come along, my beautiful girls," I said, my voice remarkably soft and entirely filled with an overwhelming protective maternal love. "It is time for us to go home." My heavy custom emerald green gown swept elegantly across the marble floor as we walked toward the massive oak double doors. The remaining venue staff, who were now my direct corporate employees, immediately rushed forward to pull the heavy doors wide open for us. The warm, humid Atlanta evening air washed over my face, carrying the sweet, fragrant scent of blooming magnolias. The stark contrast between the vicious, ugly screaming inside the grand foyer and the serene, quiet peace outside was absolutely breathtaking. My private security detail smoothly escorted us down the sweeping stone staircase. The sleek black Maybach was waiting patiently in the VIP circular driveway, its engine softly purring under the glow of the elegant street lamps. My lead driver respectfully opened the heavy rear door, offering a warm, congratulatory smile. I carefully lifted each of my fierce little warriors into their plush leather car seats, securing their safety harnesses with practiced precision. Once my daughters were safely buckled in, I gracefully slid into the luxurious, spacious cabin and firmly closed the door behind me, entirely shutting out the chaotic noise of the country club. The heavy tinted windows provided an impenetrable dark shield between my beautiful family and the toxic broken world we were leaving far behind. As the massive luxury vehicle smoothly accelerated down the manicured tree-lined driveway, I looked back at the majestic antebellum clubhouse one final time. I had spent years trying to shrink myself to fit Marcus's superficial vision of a bougie lifestyle. I desperately sought validation from a man who valued women as disposable vessels for his corporate legacy. When he and his cruel mother discarded me, they believed they had stripped me of all my worth. They thought a woman's value was strictly tied to securing a wealthy husband. True security does not come from begging for validation from arrogant men or seeking approval from hypocritical church mothers. It does not come from shrinking your brilliant potential to make insecure people comfortable. Unshakable power comes entirely from within. It comes from the fierce determination to take the painful bricks they throw at your head and use them to construct an impenetrable financial fortress. I looked down at my sleeping daughters, their faces glowing in the soft ambient light of the car. I did not just build a crisis management firm, I built a generational dynasty no arrogant man could ever tear down. I created a new standard of excellence relying solely on integrity, business acumen, and an absolute refusal to be treated as disposable collateral. You never have to accept a folding chair at a table where you are disrespected. You have the power to purchase the entire building and construct your own magnificent table. You possess the ability to rewrite the ending of your own traumatic story. If you have ever been discarded, underestimated, or told your situation is a dead end, listen carefully right now. Your heartbreak is simply the necessary catalyst for your ultimate elevation. The people who reject your potential are doing you a massive favor. They are clearing the toxic debris from your path so you can sprint toward your true destiny. Do not waste a second mourning the loss of pathetic people who lack the vision to appreciate your monumental worth. Channel your devastating grief into pure ambition. Stay silent, grind relentlessly in the shadows, and let your phenomenal success make the loudest noise. Thank you so much for listening to my journey of absolute triumph today. Please let me know in the comments below how you have successfully overcome the toxic people who tried to hold you back. Remember to hit that like button and aggressively subscribe to the channel for more deeply empowering stories of resilience, ultimate revenge, and unapologetic self-worth. Always remember that your value is absolutely infinite, and your spectacular comeback is always waiting just around the corner, ready to complete